News Channel 8 presents New Skills for Living with your host, Tom Lavin, a healthy plan for healthy living.
Hello and welcome to New Skills for Living, a show dedicated to healing and wholeness in our community. We frequently talk about children and adolescents and how they suffer from bullying. But quite frequently, we don't talk about adults, and adults can be victims of bullying. They can suffer from bullying as well. It might be at church, it might be in their own families. It could also be in the workplace where we spend 20 or 30 or 40 hours a week of our life. When an adult is bullied, they are affected negatively, physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially. So this is a really important topic for our culture to address. And I'm really glad that we have an expert with us here today to discuss adult bullying in the workplace. Deborah Scott is the Executive Director of the Nevada State Board of Nursing. She's been in nursing regulations for 17 years, and prior to that, for 10 years, she worked as a clinician, as a psychiatric nurse, and as a nurse psychotherapist. So Deborah, we are so glad to have you back to New Skills for Living. You've been on the show before, and it's great to have you back here to talk about this really important topic. And I guess, Deborah, the first thing I'd like to ask you is, could you describe what bullying looks like? What are the characteristics of bullying in the workplace?
Well, bullying is something that happens intentionally. It occurs over a prolonged period of time. It's allowed in the culture of the workplace, and it comes from either a real or an imagined imbalance of power. The behaviors can vary. I mean, they can be as much as just ignoring someone, not talking with someone, all the way to actually physical violence, threats and violence. So it pretty much runs the gamut.
Yeah. So within that continuum, I guess, could you maybe describe some other characteristics? I guess like people might sabotage each other's work or get alliances against different people. Or could you expand on some of these other ways that it shows up, Deborah?
Sure. One of the ways is that there is an in crowd and an out crowd.
Yes.
And so the person who may be a new person or maybe someone who has just recently been promoted or something like that, they are not part of the group or the in crowd in the workplace. It could be that people are ignored. It could be that people gossip, and people enjoy putting someone down. It's something that can be somewhat insidious, or it can be something that's really really out there.
Kind of allowed to happen. People know it's happening, but no one steps in. Huh?
Yeah.
And this does hurt the person, doesn't it? Their whole person.
Well, it can take its toll. What happens with bullying oftentimes is that people don't know what to do. They don't know who to go to. They don't know how to rectify the situation when they're the one being bullied. And so they rather just leave the job. And so it increases the turnover of the people in the organization.
And I guess there's probably a sense of demoralization or despair or sorrow that goes on.
Yes, yeah, and people are questioning, well, what am I doing to make this happen? What do I need to do differently? Is this something about me? And so it can be really devastating.
And then, of course, in your experience as a nurse, could you maybe talk about, and a psychiatric nurse as well, like physically what's happening with the person under that kind of stress, and mentally and emotionally, what's going on inside of them, Deborah?
Well, many times, we either have this fight or flight response, and so when we are confronted with either threats or behaviors that make us uncomfortable, either we stay and fight or we run. And so those chemicals inside of you really make you feel really awful.
Yeah, and then probably it starts to affect our sleep and our digestion. Some people might turn to alcohol or drugs.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And maybe the mind is racing, and there might be heart palpitations and just a lot of things like that.
The emotions can be anywhere from really overt anger or withdrawal.
Yeah.
And the other thing that does get affected is their productivity. They aren't able to concentrate. They aren't able to focus on their job.
Yeah, and then probably absenteeism, and maybe they develop work-related illnesses.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's true.
And then, Deborah, have you found that sometimes people then take this home, and so it's not just the individual worker, but actually the whole family might be affected by what's happening in the workplace? And if you have, can you tell us a little bit about that in this last minute?
Yes. People bring it home. They go home and they're talking all day long about over the weekend. They're talking about how bad things are at work, and the spouse doesn't have any idea of how to help, and so sometimes it comes between the spouse and the person, the actual employee who's being bullied at work.
Yeah, and then probably it starts to affect the kids too, because maybe someone's not as present to their children as they might be.
Yeah.
I guess in just this last 30 seconds, what's one thing that you would say right now to someone if they're being bullied in the workplace? Just very briefly. We'll get into this more, but
the bottom line is that if it actually is happening, and it's about creating an awareness in the culture of the environment of the organization, is to really tell someone about it. Go directly to your supervisor, and there should be policies in place.
Yeah, and don't suffer in silence.
Yes.
So that's some really great information, and we'll see you right after this brief break. Hello, welcome back to New Skills for Living. You'll see up on your screen there's information on the website where you can view Deborah's interview in the future, as well as other interviews that we've had, like with Steve Hayes and Jacqueline Pistorello, Ellen Frizzetti, some of the professors from UNR, talking about anxiety and depression. And the website is easeap.com to watch Deborah's interview and some others as well. And then I also want to remind you, those of you that have seen the show before, that there are over 90 newsletters on the website that you can pull up and read, or you can copy and share with others. Different meditations, how to help children who are in trouble, how to have a better, healthy relationship, anxiety and depression, and topics like that. Okay, so let's get back and talk with Deborah Scott. So, Deborah, can you get back and maybe talk with us about how often does this happen in the workplace?
Well, there were several studies that were done, and one specific to employees. This wasn't, even though I'm a nurse, I'm talking really in a generalization here. 80% of the people who were interviewed said that they have felt disrespect and a lack of courtesy in the workplace. And 60% of those individuals say it's even getting worse. Wow. But interestingly enough, when they asked those people's employers, only 25% of the employers says it was happening. So it really shows that I don't think that organizations are aware that it's actually happening.
So with your being an executive, why do you think that is? Why do you think there's this disconnect between the employees' experience and the executive's lack of awareness?
Well, I hate to say this, but sometimes leadership doesn't have a real good sense of what's going on in the workplace. And so that's why it's really important for, number one, for the employer to be aware of the environment and the culture that's being provided to the people that work for them.
Yeah. Well, I guess we all would put on our best face when our boss is around, or the employer, the big boss is around. And so how does a manager or an executive director or a CEO or a CFO, how do they know what's really going on then if this is happening?
Well, one of the ways is to have surveys that are anonymous and to find out actually what's happening in the workplace. The other thing is to be present with your employees, to actually talk with your employees on a regular basis, and not just in a group, but on one-to-one.
So that there's a real relationship with the employee. They're not just an FTE. But it's an actual person, and you could say, how's it going? I want to know how you're doing, huh? And
another way would be to have someone come into the workplace, do a presentation on this lateral violence, which is another word that bullying is called, and then use that as a conversation starter for the employees.
Yeah, it kind of brings it out from under the table and brings it up on top of the table for everyone to talk about.
Absolutely.
So along with the incidents, can you talk a little bit about a culture that promotes or allows bullying, Deborah?
Yeah, and I think really it starts with that lack of awareness that there is this negativity in the workplace. there are things that happen like gossip is encouraged. There are territories. This is my job, that's not my job. We don't do this together, we're not working together. Employers sometimes pit one employee against another employee, or may not have a fair culture. And so when, as much as possible, it's important for there to be a fair and equitable interchange with employees. The other thing is that the leadership must have policies and procedures in place to deal with and to show and to let employees know how to report when these incidents are happening. I mean, just someone being shunned and not being allowed to be part of the group is a form of bullying.
So what might some of those other policies and procedures look like? And I guess it also involves like maybe a mission statement or a statement about relationships within the organization. And of course it also affects patients or customers. So could you talk a little bit about those things, Deborah?
Yeah, of course mission and values is really important in a facility and in an organization, but if there isn't a true adherence to that, I think it starts from the top. Being kind and not being derogatory about employees, talking to one employee about another employee, you know, being informative and giving information to people. Those policies and procedures give guidance to employees who are actually being in some way being bullied.
Well, Deborah, again, that's some great information in this segment, and right after this brief break, we're going to return and continue to talk about this really important topic. Hello and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking with the Executive Director of the Nevada State Board of Nursing, Deborah Scott. So, Deborah, could you talk with us about victims and perpetrators?
Yes. Let's talk about the perpetrator first.
Okay.
The perpetrator generally is someone who has this underlying low self-esteem, who is trying to, and when you talk about bullying with children and in school, it's always that bully that has this underlying low self-esteem, a sense of powerlessness, a fear of change. So when a new policy comes into place or a new supervisor comes into place, then the perpetrator that will up the ante. That perpetrator often has been a victim in the past.
I see.
And you know that about children in bullying, that perhaps they have been abused at home and then they come and they abuse others at school. It's the same thing with people in the employment setting. And then the victim is generally someone new to the organization, someone who is maybe new to their position, who has been newly promoted, and so there is some jealousy that's there with the other employees. Oftentimes it's someone who is above average or the good employee, and so there's jealousy on the part of the other employees, and you know, the people that are real go-getters and really invested in the company. And so, you know, you have all of these others that have been there a while and have kind of become ho-hum around the, you know, the work that's being done. And so this new person comes in with a lot of, you know, being very excited about the work that's being done, and those people then see this person as, you know, this is someone gung-ho, and they need to they need to really shut that person down because they're looking good, and the people that have been there a while are jealous.
Of course, the impact on the organization is it really drags it back down toward mediocrity.
It really does. It really does. And in the end, what you see is increased turnover, many thousands of dollars. You see low productivity in what goes on in the facility. You see when people, customers come in, or consumers of the services that come in, you see them being mistreated too.
Yeah, it kind of filters down then.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
And then, of course, it doesn't maybe just happen between like one or two perpetrators and one victim. Everybody on the team or the staff or the organization is aware of what's going on, and it affects them too, doesn't it, Deborah?
Well, I think it's really important to realize that if you are watching something happening and you're not stepping in, that you become a perpetrator too. And that's the really important part, whereby just standing by or watching something happening really increases the amount of bullying that goes on. It's as if you are part of what actually is being part of that incivility that's going on with the employees.
Yeah, and so I would imagine the other group of people, then their stress level also goes up, and their fear also goes up, and maybe their willingness to take risks goes down.
Well, and the other thing that's happening is that they actually then there becomes a lack of trust with leadership.
Yes.
Because why isn't leadership seeing this?
Yeah.
Why isn't leadership and management intervening? Why aren't they making it a safe place for us to be? And that's what's really important, is when the workplace becomes unsafe, then it truly is a very destructive thing that goes on.
You know, Deborah, sometimes people are promoted up through the ranks, and they start off as frontline employees, and they're not really given a lot of education about how to manage or lead people. Other people, maybe their degrees are in finance or marketing, and so maybe they're not really trained to do the how to manage a team and develop a team. Can you talk about what are some of the qualities of a really good manager who creates Len Keone in Overcoming the 5 Dysfunctions of a Team talks about how important trust is, and without trust, an organization has nothing, and then the ability to take risks and communicate. But can you talk about how the qualities of a leader to create that and how they can do it?
Following through with what you say, making sure that if you say there are going to be consequences, that there are consequences. That trust is the most important thing, and it comes from the top down. In some organizations, there's like a leadership team or an executive team. The trust that is built by the executive with that team filters down then to the employees who are being supervised by the executive team. Listening, allowing people to have opportunities for their own growth, being able to say to someone, that was a really good job. You did a really good job with that. Being able to give people feedback that is constructive rather than tearing them down.
Yeah. That is some great information, and when we return, we're going to move into our fourth and final segment. We'll see you right after this brief break. Hello, and welcome back to New Skills for Living. We're talking about bullying in the workplace, and I want to share with you this information about a really great workshop in Reno, September 26th. It's called Lateral Violence in Nursing, Train the Trainers, excuse me. And this information is available at the Nevada Nurses Association if you go to that website. So this is going to be a really good one-day workshop if you'd like to learn more about lateral violence with nurses. So let's get right to this with Deborah now. Deborah, how would someone know if they're involved with bullying in the workplace? You have some great questions for us to ask ourselves, huh?
Yeah, there are several questions, and I think that this is where it starts with an awareness. So, and I actually gave this assessment quiz to my staff, and it's entitled "Could you be a toxic employee?" One of the questions was, "I'm more likely to be irritated than intrigued by my coworkers." To get irritated. I believe the management is not addressing what's going on and making things better around here. When I hear gossip about a coworker, I go immediately to other coworkers and repeat it. I have a growing loss of basic trust for my unit, for my organization, and I just feel like I don't want to do any more than the minimum to stay here. I don't believe that the people who are charged with taking responsibility and making things better around here have the wherewithal, have the talents to do that. I don't trust that they're going to be doing what they need to do to make things better. Most of my colleagues, including myself, are mainly just out for ourselves, not for the customer, not for the patient, not for the organization, just out for ourselves. And the only reason I stay is because it would put me out and I wouldn't have a job. But I stay because it would be a personal, it would be a lot of work for me to not be here anymore.
Those are some great questions.
Yeah.
Now, as a nurse executive, you really took a risk
Yeah.
to give that to your
Yeah.
staff and said, here, I want you to take this and I want you to be honest. Now,
I didn't collect the information.
you didn't, it was
No.
just for them to
Just
reflect on themselves.
Yeah.
So you didn't collect it, and you didn't have like a little group where everybody talked about it.
No.
It was just for people.
Yeah.
So it's really safe then,
Yeah.
really for an organization to engage in this. And do you find, I won't ask you about your organization specifically, but do you find that even with an exercise like that where people aren't really talking about it, they're not needing to take a great deal of risk, but really looking into their own heart and answering those questions for themselves, does it seem like there starts to be a change in the culture?
Well, several of the employees came after, because I did a short presentation and then I gave them this quiz. And they came afterwards and said, you know, I never realized how I might be involved in some of what goes on here that doesn't make it a good place for people to be.
Yeah. So it really raised their awareness.
It really did.
Yeah. Now you were mentioning earlier, Deborah, about how sometimes bullies are they have low self-esteem and maybe they've been abused in their families, and so we do end up bringing a lot of our family of origin issues into the workplace, don't we?
Yeah, which is the same with the victims.
Yes,
you know, I mean,
yes.
When people have learned to react to situations in the role of a victim, then they are so powerless to do anything about the situation.
And sometimes, of course, if someone is raised that way, they'll start to say, well, maybe this is what I deserve.
Exactly.
You know, here it goes again, but, you know, this is really what I deserve. I haven't earned respect or to be treated with dignity.
It's really destructive.
Yeah.
It really is.
What are some other topics that you'd like to talk about with, you know, we've got a couple more minutes, and we have one more minute, I'm sorry. So what's the last thing you'd like to say to us about this topic?
I would really like for people to really take a look inside and not make anyone else responsible for their own well-being, but to really take a look inside and to assess where they are. Have they been a victim? Have they been a bully in the past? And to then take the responsibility upon themselves to make the workplace a better place to be. That's where we spend so much of our time. And if we can't be productive there, and if we can't enjoy what we do, then it becomes a real it becomes a real destructive situation.
Yes. That is excellent. And up on your screen now, you'll see some information again with the website. If you'd like to view Deborah's interview as well as the other interviews, we want to thank Deborah Scott again for appearing on New Skills for Living. Deborah, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Great interview again.
Thank you so much for the invitation.
Okay. And we want you all to take good care of yourself, and we'll see you next month.